Hello and welcome back to the shop. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to demonstrate a technique of applying a false wood grain finish to a fuselage. I'm currently building an Albatros D.III, and as most of you know, the Albatros series of fighters had a plywood fuselage, and in most cases it was just clear varnished, so it left a natural wood grain. You can see the wood grain in this painting here on the cover of this book. That's what we're trying to duplicate. There are other ways of doing it. I've seen some people just use the most common way is just sheet it with balsa and clear coat it or stain it, and that works, looks okay. The balsa is quite susceptible to damage, and in the end it's not very convincing, I think. It's alright, but I'm looking for another way to do it. And I've also seen, I've also heard of people cutting sheets of 1/64 inch ply very carefully into the right shape and sheeting the entire fuselage with 1/64 inch ply. Again, that would also work and probably be the ultimate scale finish, but the level of workmanship and craftsmanship that goes into that to make sure all your different panels are exact is more than I'm willing to do. A few years ago in our seat groups, there was a modeler who goes by the username of Hammered, H-A-M-M-E-R-D. He built a 1/6 scale Albatros D.III from Peter Rake plans, and this is where I first saw this technique. He used it and it came out great. When I first looked at everything that he had to do, I was a bit intimidated. I thought, this is just so much work. It takes a master craftsman type person to be able to do this, and I thought I'd give it a try, and surprisingly it is not that difficult. It's actually quite easy and it gives a pretty good finish. So today I'll show you how to apply it to the fuselage. So let's go over some of the materials we'll need to do this. The first step is to paint your fuselage with an enamel paint in an almond color. I used Krylon on my fuselage and it worked out great. What you want to do is you want to finish the wooden fuselage and fill all the grains so it's perfectly smooth. So you can either glass the fuselage and sand it, or do like I did and use silk span and dope, whatever you need to do to get a nice smooth finish. And then apply a couple of coats of enamel almond color and let it dry probably for a couple of days. Make sure it's got a nice full cure on it. Other than that, you'll also need some latex paint. I just got this mixed up from Home Depot. You want sort of an orangish wood color. When I looked at the color samples, I came up with this one, and when I got it home and looked at it, I realized that's way too orange. So I actually mixed a little brown into my final color. But so anyway, some sort of latex paint. You can get you know, these 4-ounce tester pots work out perfectly. And you also need a product known as latex glazing liquid. I'd never heard of this before until I read this thread. I still don't really know what it does or what you would normally use it for. But what it does do is you mix it, it's a clear liquid, and you mix it with your latex paint, and it says it increases the paint's translucency and also extends its drying time. So you need a can of that. This was the smallest size I could find. Again, I got this at Home Hardware in Canada. You also need one of these fancy wood graining tools. Just plastic with a rubber face on it with these different circles. And this is how you'll make your wood grain pattern. I'll show you that later. Again, I also picked this up at Home Hardware here in Canada. I think it was about $6 or so. You'll also need just a foam brush and a wide type brush, because we're going to do some dry brushing. I'll show you that as well. You'll also need a roll of wax paper, windshield washer fluid, and a container to mix the glaze and the paint in. So when you start, or to start with, you want to take the glazing compound and the paint and a 50-50 mixture of that. And then you want to add maybe 10 to 15% of washer fluid to thin it. And then just give it a good stir. And you see it all blends together quite nicely. You can see this, I've added some brown into this to take out some of that orange tinge. And it mixes into a nice creamy paint. You'll also need a tube of gel stain. When the wood graining is complete, your last step will be to apply some gel stain, which will actually darken the enamel paint on the fuselage and will also darken the latex that's on the fuselage as well. And it'll sort of just blend everything together. You'll also need different types of tape for masking. Electrical tape is good, gives a nice sharp line. And pour les modeleurs en français, frog tape. Another thing you'll need is some sort of palette to spread the paint out. A nice sheet of flat plastic would be good. It has to be non-permeable. What I'm using here is a sheet of glass that I have on top of a piece of styrofoam. Styrofoam just keeps the glass from shattering, and the white background underneath just gives me some sort of contrast so I know how much paint I'm putting down. So here's my D.III fuselage. As you can see, I've already done quite a bit of it to get the technique down. It's coming out pretty good. So because I'm replicating panels, I'm sort of doing it bit by bit. So this next panel here is all one piece. I'm going to have to mask this off to form a panel. So I will take my frog tape. And one thing I'm always nervous about is pulling up the paint that I've just put down. It seems to stick pretty good. I haven't had a problem yet. But what I like to do is just take the masking tape and I put it down on something, just even my shirt here. Just put it right against my shirt and pull it off, just to reduce the tack. And then just lay it right on where the panel is. A little bit of overlap is okay, so that some of the previous grain is showing through. And you don't need a super tight seal, so you don't have to really press it down hard. If you have areas where there's a compound curve, that's when I break out the electrical tape, because the vinyl, it'll conform to the compound curves much better. So there we go with that. Next step, take some wax paper, lay it over, and just cut out a piece that's the same size as the outline of your masking tape, basically. You don't want it to be much bigger than you don't want it to be any bigger than the outsides of your masking tape, otherwise you'll run into trouble when you put on the paint. And again, exact size isn't important here. Double check that. Yeah, looks good. So I'll just leave that there and keep it handy, and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so here we are at our palette. We'll take our paint, give it a good stir and make sure it's all mixed up. Another thing you'll want while you do this is a nice supply of paper towel. Take a foam brush and apply some paint to the palette. You want to make an area that's at least the size of the panel that you're about to do on the model. So basically the size of the wax paper you just cut out. And you want to put on not a super thin coat, but you don't want a super thick coat either. And because of that glazing compound that extends the drying time, you got lots of time to do this. There's no rush. So I put that on. Now we take our fancy tool here. And what you want to do is start off in a horizontal position, and I'll show you the technique first. What I'll do is I'll drag this through the paint, and as I'm dragging it, I'll rock it. And you want to put a little bit of downward pressure on there too to get the pattern in here. So here it goes. And you can see how it makes that cool pattern. And the more frequently you rock it, the more of those knots you'll get. So the next one, you want to change it up a little. There we go. There's our wood grain pattern. So the next step is to take our wax paper and pick an area that you like the looks of the grain of and plunk it down. Don't smear it around because this is going to be a stencil. So I just take a brush I have here and I just gently brush that into the paint to make sure the paint contacts the wax paper everywhere. Now the next step is difficult to film, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this up and transfer it over the model, right? So I just got a little knife here just to raise the edge as I lift it, and it'll come up. So I'm going to shut off, move the camera so you can see the fuselage, and we'll be right back. So here's my wax paper transfer. I'm going to carefully position it, lay it right down on top, and you can see the paint beads a little bit because of the wax. Don't worry about it. And then I take this brush again, and again I just gently brush it down to make sure the paint contacts the fuselage everywhere. So we've done that. Now we lift off our paper carefully so we don't smudge. Doesn't look like much now. And we take our brush, our dry brush, and then you just pull it in streaks to spread this out. Not too much pressure, just lightly. And if there's dark areas like here, just go over that again. And that's it. Now you just let it dry. I peel the tape off now. And you can see if you can brush some of the tape right up, or sorry, brush some of the paint right up against the edge of the tape, it actually forms a nice panel line. It gives you contrast as well. So it works out great. There, that's it. So I like to give this about an hour or two to dry. I find that that's pretty good, and then you could flip it over and then like work on the other side, which I'm going to need to do because I haven't done this side yet, obviously. And I also have to finish off the bottom. Now you can see you could actually get more than one application. If you have a smaller area that you now want to go back and do some more with, you know, there's paint there for you. This is probably important to keep the palette clean, so this is one of the reasons that lots of paper towel is handy. So you just give that a wipe, it comes off easily. And then I just clean everything up with water and let it dry. One thing I should mention, when you're doing the dry brushing using this brush, it really does have to be dry. If this is damp or wet or anything, the technique doesn't work very well. Instead of getting nice grain lines, you'll get smears almost. So you do have to make sure that your dry brush is good and dry before you do the graining, spreading out the grain finish. But that's all there is to it. It's an easy technique, and works great. So once this is all done and dry, we'll give it the final stain, and we'll see you then.